It's the hog style.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hogsty. Sean, Robbie, and Steve here with you today. What's up, fellas?
How's it going?
Doing great.
Redskins had a little shopping splurge this past week, possibly overshadowing the draft that is just in 4 freaking days. But
Yes.
Here to talk about all of that, we're joined today by longtime friend of the show, writer for the Washington Post, Mr. Mark Bullock. Hello, Mark.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Welcome back.
Very, very happy to
Thanks,
see you.
guys.
And you're a vampire we wanted to throw in there because you're up late at night your time to be with us, so we're very grateful.
It's no worries.
All right, well, we got to talk draft with you. Obviously, you've written a lot of stuff about the draft as we come up to it. Again, just 4 days away. But first things first, Redskins had a little shopping spree this weekend, picking up Josh Norman. And I know you wrote 3 days ago about potential cornerbacks we could target, and then this broke just yesterday. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising just the whole thing happening. I don't think anyone expected the whole situation of someone like Josh Norman to become a free agent at this point of the season.
Yeah, I certainly did not.
Yeah, it's kind of a shock, and then it was kind of a whirlwind. And at first, it was like, nah, they wouldn't. There's no way they could afford him. And then they were interested. It's like, well, they do have the moves that they could make if they needed to. And then all of a sudden, it was Redskins are front runners, and he's visiting them. And then once that happens, it's kind of a done deal.
Yeah. We want to ask you, obviously. I'm sorry to interrupt. We want to ask you, obviously, about his fit on the team schematically, but also, I mean, what about this contract? I mean, is this like a crazy contract to you? 5 years, 50 guaranteed? Is that, what's your take on the size of it?
Yeah, I mean, the price is the big issue for me. Obviously, the contract is the 5 years, 75 million and the 50 million guaranteed. That's what the agent puts out to make himself look great.
Right.
But from what it seems
good.
like, it comes. Yeah. Well, for him, it looks fantastic. But for when it comes down to it, it looks like it's more of a 2-year deal with a bunch of options. And
Well, you know
it's
what?
still expensive. But,
I did a little bit of research into this contract, and it's actually a really good contract for the Redskins. It's how it works here is it's an $8 million cap hit for this coming season, $20 million dead cap. So he's here for the next 2 years. Is here no matter what. $28.5 million dead cap next year. But the cap hits are descending, from year 2 all the way to year 5, and so it's to the point where we could actually keep him all 5 years if his play warrants it, and not have to get rid of him, because the cap hit goes 20 million, 17 million, then 14.5 million, then 15.5 million. So it gets kind of less threatening as the years go by, which is unlike some contracts we sign people to.
Yeah, I don't think it's what everyone has been worried about. Is that I don't think it's been a Dan Schneider contract.
No, it's not.
It's not Albert Haynesworth all over again.
Yeah, and
it's a rather unique situation. So
that's what I was going to ask. Actually, it's a high priority or a big name free agent that we just brought in, signed to a big contract. A lot of people are hating on it being a Dan Snyder move, but the contract shows that it's not a Dan Snyder move. He's a great talent that I don't know. It's kind of like a steal how it's all working out.
Well, see, what the old contracts, the Vinny contracts, is he would dump all the money into the back end, and so you get to some year where the cap it would be enormous, but you're still stuck with him. Whereas this contract isn't like that. But we're not here to talk numbers with you, Mark. What we really want to do is hear how you think Josh Norman fits into our scheme, which is primarily a zone scheme, cover 3. How do you think Josh Norman fits into that?
yeah, I mean that's the thing. You sign a guy to that kind of money, and you think he's going to be Darrelle Revis. He follows the top receiver all around the game, and marks him out of it. But that's just not what type of corner he is. He's primarily a zone corner. That's not to say he can't play man coverage. Every corner has to play man coverage at some point.
Right.
But he's primarily a zone corner, and he's as good as there is in terms of being a zone corner. He plays in Carolina. He played as a cover 3 corner or quarters corner, cover 2 sometimes as well. And he was excellent with trap coverages. And all of this is kind of stuff Redskins ran last year. I mean, at the start of the year, it was primarily cover 3 as their base defense. which fit fantastically well in. Towards the end of the year, the second half of the year, after they had some injuries, they had to go more man coverage with Dunbar and Breland, and they had some success with that, but they still mixed in zone coverages, and that's where I think Norman will be best, and I think it's a pretty good fit.
Is there any chance that without that nice, cushion of having a good defensive front, that he just comes in here and it's too much burden on him right away, and he just what are the chances, I guess I'm asking, that he severely underwhelms coming out of Carolina to here?
I don't think he'll severely underwhelm. It's a good point that they'll need to have a better pass rush than they've had to sustain the zone coverages that they want to run and that he excels at. But that doesn't necessarily mean he'll underwhelm. What he does best is he takes away the deep threat, and he reads the game very well. He reads the route concepts very well, and he knows where he has to be to take away deep threats, and then he knows when the opposition's maybe not trying to attack him, when he can kind of cheat out of his zone to try to help someone else. So he's still going to be an effective player, and he's definitely going to be an impact player, certainly in the next couple years, the first few years of that contract. Yeah, sorry.
My impression of him, my non-expert eyes watching film on him, is that he's got outstanding ball skills, number one, and not just hands, but he really knows where the ball is going to be and where it should be, and he's outstanding at setting traps for the quarterback. He can read the quarterback's eyes really well. He knows how to sit back in a zone, use the back end safety, and really set those quarterbacks up. I think he's more physical and a better man coverage guy than people give him credit for.
He's a better. I'm not saying he's a bad man cover corner. You don't get to be as good as he is without being solid in man coverage, because you can't just play zone all game long. As you say, he does have terrific ball skills. He uses his length very well. He tracks the ball in the air extremely well. His speed gives him ridiculous recovery speed. In an article that went out today, I showed a play against the Cowboys where he completely whiffed on a jam on Des Bryant, but he just turned and ran, kept up with him, and then made this outstanding leap using his full length to knock the ball away and knock it incomplete. And so he can play man coverage. He is physical. I like the way he can break down on underneath routes and tackle, wrap up and hit guys, diagnose screens and make tackles for loss and that kind of thing. He's not the best jamming at the line of scrimmage. I don't like him quite as much in press. He misses a lot of jams and can quite often get beaten off the snap like that. But he has the recovery speed to make up for it. It's just a few years down the line, if we're still looking at this being a big contract, and as you say, it's not quite as bad as what everyone's making out to be. But if he doesn't have that, if he loses a step or two and he doesn't have that recovery speed, then he has to either get better at jamming at the line of scrimmage, or they'll have to play more zone.
Yeah. I've just been, like you said, his ability to leap and play the ball. He has such an ability to high point the ball. Like that, you see that highlight of his interception against the Saints. Like he just all out sprawls and just finds the ball at the highest point he could, and to make that, clinch game-saving interception.
That was in the one in the end zone?
Yeah, that one. But the other thing about him that you can't really measure is he's a trash talker. Like he gets in the receivers' heads, and it's going to be
all the great
perfect.
Defenders are.
He really reminds me of a bigger, a little slower D'Angelo Hall. I think he plays the same as D'Angelo. He's got the same ball skills, that same zone coverage guy. He doesn't have D'Angelo Hall's elite speed at all, but he's a little bit bigger, probably a little bit stronger. Is that fair? Fair comp, maybe?
I would say he's probably a little bit more consistent than Hall ever was. Hall was very good at, as you say, zone coverages and jumping routes, and he was quick as hell. But
risk taker.
Yeah, he was a risk taker, and Norman's not quite so much. Norman's a little bit more consistent, but D'Angelo Hall, I think, probably while he played corner, had to deal with more varied routes than Norman has because of the scheme that they had in Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see just how he translates. But I think he should fit the scheme fine on a base on the base defense with kind of cover 3 and quarters.
Where do you know, if the lineup stays the same as it is now, nobody gets cut, nobody gets hurt. We've got Norman, Breland, Culliver, and then some backups. So we've got 3 starting quality cornerbacks now.
Culliver's
where
getting cut.
I don't know. I mean, he's hurt and he's got a big number. Mark,
cut
where do
him.
you see these guys playing in terms of who's the starter, who's the nickel back, etc.?
Yeah, I would say that the top 2 are Norman and Breland. They'll play either
I love
side.
those names together, Mark.
I do too.
So they should be a good pair. I would guess Norman will probably play right side because that's where they had the number 1 corner the entire time last year, and then Breland will play left side, but they can swap depending on matchups or whatever. And then if Culliver stays, I expect he'll be the 3rd corner. Either he'll have to slide into nickel, or they'll put him on the outside and they'll slide Breland into nickel.
What do you think of Culliver? I'm sorry, Robert. What do you think of Culliver? I think he was misused last year, you know, in his skills. What do you think about him?
Yeah, he's not a. He can play zone coverage. I wrote about him last year when they signed, and I said at the time he can play zone coverage. He's smart enough, and he's good enough. I think he was misused slightly. He excels at press coverage, at being able to jam receivers on the line of scrimmage, and then bailing out into zones. And he wasn't allowed to do that, or he didn't do it for whatever reason. I think he was hurt a little bit last year as well, so that probably limited him more than he let on. I still would hold hope that he could come back and be a solid corner, but he himself admits that it can sometimes take up to 2 years to come back from the type of injury he's had. And with that kind of cap hit, I would wonder if he's someone that has to make a way to allow them to sign all the draft picks. Yeah.
Well, interesting thing. You know Manny Benton. You do stuff with him here and there. You did the podcast with him. I think talking. What was it linebacker? No, it was safeties. You talked with him about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You talked safeties. He brought up the other day that Culliver has played safety. Is it? You think? And they've mentioned before that they're moving some corners to safety. Is Culliver that guy that they move, or is it Will Blackman? What do you think?
I would be reluctant to do that to a guy in the second year of a contract that they've paid him to be kind of a number 1 corner. I'd be reluctant to move him to safety so early. They've already moved D'Angelo Hall from corner to safety. They're talking about Blackman and all these other guys moving. They've got to keep some people at corner. So there's talks that they could have moved Breland to safety, and Breland probably would have made a hell of a safety as well. But I to say he couldn't play it, I would be reluctant to say he couldn't play it, but I would say I would leave him at corner or cut him loose. I wouldn't necessarily transition him to safety.
Well, let me ask you this. We got to transition to some draft stuff because obviously that's looming large here this coming week. But I just want to ask you, to finish up on the Norman stuff, it kind of feels like this is the era of like power corners. Everybody kind of wants, like a Richard Sherman type. Everybody wants that. So my question is, was that the position you would have splurged on? Is that to you the critical piece that we needed to drop this dime on?
Well, see, this is the interesting debate, is that because he's more of a zone corner and the scheme is more zone-based, is a zone corner as valuable as, say, a Revis or a Sherman? And I know Sherman plays in the cover 3 defense in Seattle, but he plays a lot of man coverage within that, and he plays a lot of press coverage within that. Is the zone corner as valuable as those guys that can follow a receiver around and effectively lock them out of a game? And I would say, no, they're not that valuable. But at the same time, in the passing league, corners with ball skills that can cover, that are smart, that bring an attitude to the defense that they're looking to build, that all factors into what kind of value he can add to the defense. And if he can bring all of that, and he can solidify them in the secondary with him and Breland, give them a partnership for a couple of years now. As long as they can sort out safety situation, then they're looking all right.
Well, the problem I think is that with in a salary cap era, there's only a limited number of players that get these big contracts that have got cap hits over 10 million. And as we said, the contract isn't quite as onerous as everybody thought. But there's only a limited number of players who can have these, and we've got Cousins, we've got Junior Galette may need a big contract. We've got Jordan Reed. There's a whole host of players. And as a result of bringing on this zone coverage guy, it may be that we can't afford to keep all those other guys, at contracts that they want. And so the team is going to have to make a decision, about somebody, as early as next year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You've got guys like Baker and Jordan Reed, and you've got the receiver situation you've got to sort out, and Cousins, as you mentioned. So there's a lot of money that they're going to have to spend soon. And everyone says, oh, well, the salary cap's going up every year and all of this. But, I mean, you can't just keep paying guys this kind of contract that they give Norman. So you do have to wonder exactly the value of that deal. But he's the kind of guy that they want in the locker room, and he's the kind of guy that will improve the defense drastically. And that's what they've gone with. They've gone with corners on the edge. They've got Breland and Norman, and they've gone with pass rushers, and they've got Kerrigan, who they've paid. They've got Galette, who they might have to pay, or they can let him walk and let Preston Smith keep going. And that's what the value of the draft is. You keep recycling draft picks, and you keep bringing through guys, and you let the guys that are too expensive leave, and let them get their money elsewhere, and you replace them with draft picks.
You just made my job easy, because that's exactly where I was going to next. Perfect segue to the draft.
So excited.
Speaking about making the defense better. Yeah, speaking of making the defense better, I mean, we got the corner now, so that kind of changes our draft strategy. Yeah. Let's go ahead and just address the number one spot that everyone talks about for us, especially with our first pick in the draft. Everyone seems to think we're going to draft a D lineman with that first pick. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but let's go ahead and talk about your favorite players for that spot and our favorite players. Right off the bat, they always talk about those Alabama defensive tackles, Jaron Reed and Ashawn Robinson. I'm not a big fan of them. I think they're pretty overrated. They're run stoppers, but don't have pretty much anything to add to a pass rush. I like how they're, at least Robinson's young and can add and can develop and grow, but I don't know. I'm not a big fan of them. What about you?
Yeah, the Alabama guys are kind of intriguing. The system that they're asked to play in is a two-gap system. They are asked to be run defenders, and if they can add pass rush, then that's a bonus. But they're primarily there to be run defenders. I think when I watched them initially, I had very much the same thought process that you did. I didn't see any kind of pass rush from them. I thought, well, these guys are terrific run defenders, but they're going to be off the field on third down, and that's not what you want from your first-round pick. However, having gone back and really studied them and really looked for traits, I like Ashawn Robinson a little bit more than Jaron Reed. I think Reed's a little bit more versatile. I think he can play all the different spots on the defensive line. He can play over the nose. He can play shade one. He can play 3 tech, 5 tech, and he'll be obviously he's going to be a fantastic run defender from day one. I think he has a little bit more of a pass rush to him now than Robinson does. But I think he's a little bit more limited in where he can develop with that pass rush. Whereas Robinson, I think, is more of a guy who would be a better fit with the Redskins. I think he has he's a guy that is so athletic, and he doesn't jump out as athletic because of the way he was asked to play at Alabama. But when you look at him, he looks like a guy that's like maybe a heavy linebacker, like a 280 linebacker. He's what, 310? He's incredibly athletic. He's got great feet. He's got underrated hands. I just think he doesn't. He was limited in what he could do, and I don't think he knows exactly how much potential he has as a pass rusher. He would take a lot of coaching, but I think day one you could you could do a lot worse than picking Robinson at 21, plugging him in as your starting right end or left end or whatever, and having him clog up rushing lanes, penetrating into the backfields, and then working on him, developing him as a pass rusher, so that 2 or 3 years down the line, you've got a guy that's incredibly athletic and potentially a dominant player. But that said, yeah, I'm not. There are better guys, certainly more immediate impact players in terms of pass rushers on the defensive line that you can get at 21.
I'm not afraid to draft a guy whose primary skill is run stopping, though. I mean, it was the biggest weakness on the team last year. We were just terrible in run defense, and they need a guy who can clog rushing lanes. And so if Reader Robinson is that guy, God bless him, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's
for me.
And yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Yeah,
See, for me though, you want your first pick in the draft, your first round pick. Those are guys that you need that can do it all, so to speak. You can find your role players later in the draft, like a guy that's known for stopping the run. But when I'm looking at the first pick, whether it's D-line, whether it's safety, whether it's linebacker, I need a guy that that's an impact player that can do anything that you ask him to do.
Scott's shown he feels the same way, right? I mean, he's always drafted versatility.
Yeah, I think if you're going to pick one or the other in the first round, you're picking a guy that can rush the passer, particularly from a defensive tackle, an interior lineman point of view, because you see guys like Aaron Donald and Fletcher Cox rushing from insides, pressure up the middle. The quarterbacks cannot handle pressure up the middle. And they don't know what to do when a guy bursts through the A gap or the B gap, and that just causes horrendous panic. So if you have a guy that can do that, you'll be willing to take him getting pushed around a little bit in the run game and supporting him that way, rather than having to teach a guy that's a fantastic run defender how to rush the passer.
Take that.
But that being said, that I think. It's an underrated aspect of the game for fans, is being able to be a solid run defender. And guys like Reed and Robinson, they're going to be well worth their pick wherever they're picked, because day one they're going to come in, they're going to have an impact. It's just not going to be the kind of impact that fans will necessarily notice, because they won't suddenly pop up with 8 to 10 sacks a year. It'll be more like 30 or 40 tackles, but they'll be opening up linebackers who will be getting hundreds of tackles, and they won't get noticed, but they'll be inside the team locker room. They'll be highly noticed. And I think that's the kind of the same for a guy like Reggie Ragland. And we'll get onto linebackers, I assume, in a bit, but that's the same for him. Is that people are like, he's not athletic. He won't cover very well. Well, he can cover well enough. He's not the slowest guy around. He can play the zone underneath. He can take away the crosses, which is what you'd need him to do in, say, a cover 3 defense like the Redskins have. And he's a fantastic run defender. And I think that's highly underrated by some people. So I think Steve has a point when he says that you're happy to take a guy that can stop the run. I think in the first round you would prefer, if it was one or the other, to take a guy that could penetrate and be a pass rusher. But there'd be no shame in taking a guy like my preference would be Robinson, because I feel like he can be developed down the line. But there'd be no shame in taking him and plugging him in day one and saying, hey, stop the run, and we'll work with you to develop you as a pass rusher, so that 2 or 3 years down the line we've got a complete defensive tackle. That you can do a lot worse than that.
I didn't hear anything you said after Steve has a point.
At least somebody. I'm glad somebody thinks I have a point. That makes me very happy.
Well, before we move to safety, I wanted to ask you, who actually is your favorite prospect for the D-line? And is there someone you think that can be found in the later rounds of the draft instead of having to pick one in the first round?
My favorite guy probably would be Sheldon Rankins, but I don't necessarily think that he will fall to 21. I would think he'd be picked between the kind of 10 to 15 range, maybe certainly before the Redskins pick. I'm a big fan of Andrew Billings, guys that are that big, that move that well. There's a lot of talent to be harvested there. It'd be getting him in the right system and developing him, but there's certainly a lot of talent to be had there. In terms of guys, there's guys I like in the second round and in the third round. I like Jonathan Bullock from Florida. I like him a lot as a guy that can play 5 tech. Yeah, exactly. He could play 5 tech. He can play 1 tech. He can fit in between if they kick to 4 down on nickel packages and whatnot. He can kick into 3 tech, and he can penetrate. He's a fantastic run defender. He needs to work a little bit on his pass rushing moves, but he does have a good use of hands. He knows how to fight for leverage and how to gain leverage. It's just making the most of it.
Real quick, for the benefit of the average football fan out there listening, can you give a real brief synopsis on what is meant by 3 tech, 4 tech, 5 tech, so the fans understand?
Sure. So 1 tech is you have 0 technique, which is lined up directly over the center, and then you have 1 technique, which is shaded in the A gap, which is either side of the center between either guard, and then you have 3 technique, which is shaded outside of either guard, and then 5 technique. There's people different places will vary. I count as 5 technique is over the tackle, head over the tackle.
Then there's 4-eye.
Yeah, some people call that 4-eye. Some people call that different things. So, but I've always known it as 5 technique is directly over the tackle. And then you get wider and you get out to the guys that are 9 technique that are miles outside and trying to bend the edge and pass rush. So yeah, those are those guys. Those are those techniques, and you have guys like Jonathan Bullard who are so versatile that you see them line up directly over the tackle, over the center, or in any gap essentially, and they can be effective.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to the safety position. I remember in the beginning days of the draft talk, your favorite player was Darian Thompson. Has that changed? Yeah. It seems like you're a Carl Joseph fan now.
Yeah, I watched Darian Thompson very early on, and I definitely had a little bit of a draft rush on him. I thought he was a fantastic safety. I still think he's a fantastic safety. He's a very well-rounded safety that can do. There's not many safeties that you get that can do it all, and he's that kind of safety that you'd be fine with him playing as a strong safety up in the box, and he reads the run game very well. He can break on it and find his gap and his fit and make a tackle, and he can break down and wrap up and tackle as well. You'll see a lot of guys that when they tackle, certainly safeties, when they try to tackle, they try to go for a cam chance, their knockout hit, and guys will just bounce off of them. But Thompson goes and he wraps up, and that's something me in particular, I find I value that a lot higher than probably most people do.
Textbook stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because the Redskins safeties over the last few years haven't exactly been particularly great tacklers, and it's incredibly frustrating to watch some guy who should get tackled for 3 yards burst it for a 60-yard touchdown. So, and Thompson, he can do it all. He's got the range and the instincts to play center field deep. He can play in the box. He can roll down and cover the slot. He's got the size to cover tight ends. So I do like him a lot. The questions I have about him are the level of competition he played against, which, I mean, you can make that argument for a lot of different prospects, but I think I'd just like to see more of him as well. There was only a couple of games that I got to watch of him, and they weren't against particularly high competition, so I'd still be perfectly happy to draft him. But what I saw from Thompson was a very, very solid player. And then once I started studying Carl Joseph, and I went in with this kind of impression that, this guy is just a big hitter, and I bet he won't tackle anyone properly, and he won't be that great in coverage. But then when I started studying him, I saw a guy that he just stands out, and you see a guy that can be a special player, is a special talent. It reminded me of when I watched Tyrann Mathieu a few years ago. He was a guy that he just stands out. He just has a nose for the football. He's always around the ball, making plays, stripping the ball out for fumbles, making interceptions, breaking up passes, and that's what Carl Joseph is. He makes huge hits. He can cause fumbles. He strips the ball. He has great feet. He has good quickness. The the only two things that there are on Joseph is his size, because he's not 6 foot and he's not 230 pounds or whatever Cam Chancellor is, and that leads to durability questions with his knee injury. And there's reports that he'll be out for the first 4 games of the year. I couldn't care less about that. I'd still happily draft him.
I think that's not important at all. It's long term is what's important.
Exactly. You see how the Rams did with Todd Gurley last year. He's a supreme talent. They don't care that he misses time to start the year.
Something tells me they're happy.
Yeah, exactly. It's about what he does for the next 4 or 5 years, not the first 4 games. So he's a supremely talented kid. He has basically everything you look for in a safety, and he has the potential to be a special player. Whereas I see Thompson as a guy that could be a very, very solid player and someone that won't let you down. I just see, and it's not a knock on Thompson, it's just saying that's how good I think Joseph can be, is that he can be a very special player.
Joseph reminds me of Earl Thomas. Maybe not as fast or can cover as much ground as Thomas does, but same reliable tackling skills, cover skills, it very much in the same realm of Earl Thomas.
Yeah, he's Thomas was kind of a guy that you'd always say was always going to be a free safety because of the range he had, and he has great coverage instincts and the speeds and the wrapping up tackling. Joseph doesn't quite have the range, as you say, but I think he's more well-rounded. He's just as big a hitter, and he's a guy that you'd be happy to say, hey, let's stick him in the box for 10 plays, and then, oh, well, we need to rotate for a different matchup. Let's drop him back into center field. Oh, well, we've got some guy in the slot that we can't cover. Let's whack him into the slot and have him cover that. He's a guy that you'd be more than happy with playing multiple different roles on this defense, and I think he'd do it excellently.
Well, the other name we have to discuss real quick. I mean, a lot of Redskin fans have a crush on Keanu Neal. See, for me, I watch him. I see a big hitter, a thumper kind of guy, but you've pointed it out before too. He's just not much of a wrap-up tackler and consistent in that aspect. I think I like him. I like his energy, but he doesn't bring more to the table like Carl Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. I think you and I have talked about this on Twitter and whatnot. I think we've agreed on it. I see Neil as he has a fantastic attitude. He's a big hitter. When he lands those hits, he's incredibly. He sparks a defense, and he can be a spark for a defense, but he doesn't. I think he just doesn't know how to break down and tackle. Every time I've seen him try to do it, he misses. So that leads to him, every time he tries to tackle, he just tries to knock the guy out. And in college, that worked a lot of the time for him. But when he came up against bigger guys, like he came up against Derrick Henry against Alabama, and Henry had already picked up a first down, and Neal's coming down from free safety, and you think, just make the tackle, just wrap him up, stop him gaining extra yards. But he tries to come in for the knockout hit, and Henry just bounces off of him and ends up picking up an extra 10 yards. So for me, I probably knock him more than most people do because of that tackling. As I said, I value tackling from safeties in particular a lot more than probably most people do. But for me, he's more of a 3rd or 4th round guy because of that tackling. And he's a well-rounded player. He's got decent coverage instincts. He's got decent range. When he reads the run, he reads it terrifically well. And he's definitely a willing tackler. I think he just doesn't necessarily know how to do it. I think he kind of just... all he knows how to do is to try to go and knock a guy out, and too many players bounce off of him. And in the NFL, more than that will bounce off of him, more than what he had in college will bounce off of him and pick up yards. I think he's a guy that I hesitate to say like Bakari Rambo.
Yikes.
Oh, God, don't say that name. That's not good.
That will bring a stigma with Redskins fans, but he's a guy like Rambo that has the kind of talent. He just needs to... I think he needs a year on the sidelines.
That's a great comparison, actually. I hadn't heard that yet.
I think he needs a year to kind of sit and just and learn and work on his tackling technique. and then he could be a very good safety.
Chad wouldn't like that, by the way, Mark.
Yeah, I know. Chad and I go back and forth on that, and Chad, he's fallen in love with Neil. I mean, fair enough. Neil's a good player, and you see the big hits, and you see the ball skills and the coverage ability and the range. It's all there. I can't take a guy in first or second rounds that I can't trust to tackle.
Well, yeah, and I mean, considering how many people break through to our secondary, it's probably important that we have a strong tackler in our secondary.
Well, it's just timed to end the safety crisis.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
So
it's
true.
been going on 10 years now since Sean Taylor left, you know, God rest his soul. And since that time, we haven't found anybody whatsoever who can tackle reliably back there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think. I thought Goldson was about the best guy we'd had in forever, you know, back there. No, he's gone.
Yeah, Golston, he was a solid safety. I think the thing that he brought more than anything else was his leadership and making sure everyone was lined up. I actually thought that D'Angelo Hall did a really good job back there.
Yeah, I think I tried to bait you into saying Goldston was great last time you were on, and you didn't take it back then either.
I think Hall did a really good job back there, and I think he could be the kind of free safety and the guy that leads everyone for a couple of years. And he was a lot more physical than I thought he would be, and he was a lot better tackler than I thought he would be. I didn't think the coverage stuff would be a problem for him, and it wasn't. And for him to be the kind of leader of the defense, I think he can take that role. But to add a guy like Carl Joseph in and put him beside Hall, and those guys can both rotate. They can both play down in the box. They can both play deep. They could both cover the slot if they need to. That would give them a lot of versatility. That would give them a really talented young safety, maybe the most talented safety they've had since they drafted Sean Taylor. And that would finally kind of give them at least something to hang their hopes on at safety, rather than relying on these old free agents that used to be something and aren't quite anything or aren't quite what they were, and finally get some youth in there.
All right, so before we move on to the next position group, I'm just going to go ahead and ask you, what is your prediction for the first pick? Like, what position are we taking, and who is your player?
See, I'm going back and forth on this because Keith's asked me to do a mock draft for this week at some point, and originally it was going to be for tomorrow. But
Keith McMillan, editor at the Washington Post, who's also a friend of the show.
Shout out.
Sorry. So I've been looking, and I've been going back and forth, and the guy I think I like most in the draft is Carl Joseph, so I think it just makes sense to take him there. But I feel like with McLuhan saying he wants 12 picks, and I don't think he'll get 12 picks, but to get anywhere near close to that, you're going to have to trade down from either the first round or the second round, and I don't want to be trading down from the second round because I think that's where the business is in this draft, and in most drafts. I'd be more willing to trade down from the first, pick up an extra second, maybe an extra third or a fourth for the trouble, and have a couple picks in those rounds, and potentially give up Carl Joseph unless he falls with the injury and all that kind of stuff, and then have more picks in the second round where the meat of the draft is. But if I'm staying at 21, I kind of, unless someone falls that you don't expect, the kind of guys Joseph is kind of the top of my board at 21, unless someone falls like a Rankins, or I've toyed with the idea of receiver, but I don't think there's a guy I like.
You and Rich Tandler, man. Rich Tandler's been beating the wide receiver drum for weeks now.
I've toyed with the idea with it because of the Garcon and Jackson situation, but I can't. There's no guy I like.
Yeah.
Well, there's no guy I like enough in the first round to go, you know what, I'm just going to take him, and I know over the next few years he's going to be very good for us, even if he's kind of stuck behind Garcon and Jackson and Crowder this year. There's no guy that I like that much that makes me go, I'm going to pass on a defensive lineman, or I'm going to pass on Carl Joseph, or whoever your DB is. There's no receiver that I like that much.
Yeah,
I like a lot of receivers. I just don't like them at 21.
There's plenty of guys that you can take in the later rounds that you can groom and develop until Garcon and Jackson are gone. I don't think you have to devote a first round or second round pick to that.
Well, this is the thing. I think I'd be more happy taking a guy in the second than I would taking a guy in the first. There are plenty of guys that I'd like in the second. I'd be happy if you can trade back and you can say you have 2 second-round picks and 2 third-round picks. I'd be happy to spend that first second-round pick on a guy like Mike Thomas from Ohio State, because he would give us some size. He's a fantastic route runner. He's got enough speed, and he's a very well-rounded receiver that's somewhat underrated. But he might not necessarily be there. Then you'd be looking at maybe a guy like Braxton Miller because of his quickness. But it's kind of a gamble with a guy that's only been a receiver for 1 year.
He's a really raw route runner.
Yeah,
I would take that. I'd take the flyer on him. You know, give him his coach give the coach a player like him that you just groom and develop and mold to fit the scheme. I think he'd be an extremely talented and interesting player to have on that offense.
I really like Braxton Miller, and don't get me wrong, I'd be fine with them taking him in the second round. It would be, and you see some clips of him where he shakes a guy out of his cleats. He's so quick and
he's a
so
heck of an
sudden.
athlete. He just needs to learn how to be a pro wide receiver.
Yeah,
it's the nutshell of it.
The question is whether he can develop into that receiver, or is he going to be like a kind of a Tavon Austin in LA with the Rams, where he's kind of just a gadget guy that you have in the slot. You maybe put him into the backfield for a couple of running plays a game.
And that's most certainly not what we need as a gadget guy. We need a solid receiver who's going to replace Pierre Garçon someday.
Yeah, and I don't know whether Braxton Miller is a guy that you want as your number 1 or number 2 receiver on the outside. I think he's more of a guy you'd want in the slot, and Jamison Crowder is a fantastic slot receiver already, I think, and I think he's only going to get better. So, yes, I would be happy. I'd be fine with Braxton Miller. I think you can see the upside, you can see the potential, but I think there are other receivers, and Mike Thomas is the kind of the guy that I like best, where I'd be more happy with that kind of guy, which would offer us. He's very much kind of like Garçon in that he's a very good route runner. He brings a physical play style. He'll get yards after the catch, and he'll happily go and get the ball and take a hit to make the catch. So I'd be more happy to get Mike Thomas in the second round, but I'd be fine with Braxton Miller because, as you say, he's got tremendous potential.
What about Laquan Treadwell?
Treadwell's an interesting guy. Because I go back and forth with him and Doxson. I feel like I prefer Josh Doxson to Treadwell. Treadwell's a guy that at times he reminds me. He reminds a lot of people of Des Bryant in his physical. He's very physical. He's such a good run blocker, and he dominates the ball in the air. He can use his body amazingly well to hold guys off, shield the ball from them, and go up and get it. But Doxson can do a lot of the same stuff. He's not as physical. He's a little bit quicker, and he can shake a few more guys. Then I feel like Treadwell will try to run guys over a little bit more, and I don't feel like he has the same size and the same bulk as a guy like Des Bryant that does that already. That's not to say he can't necessarily get there, but I think I would prefer more of a Doxson than a Treadwell. But if you're looking at either of those two, you're looking more in the first round than the second, because I don't think either of them are going to be lasting, certainly to the way the Redskins pick in the second round.
Well, we could certainly talk these positions and draft all day, and we value your time. And I'm just going to go ahead and rapid fire the rest of the positions, and you can kind of just name off who your favorites are, or someone that people don't really quite know. Next group is the center. Obviously, the top one is Ryan Kelly. I'm actually a big fan of Max Torque. I kind of pointed you onto him for this podcast. But what do you think about those two, real quick?
Yeah, I like Kelly. I'm with you. I'm kind of a Max Turk camp. I do like Kelly, and I see very much the upside. He's a very polished player. He can run the zone scheme. He can run the power. He can down block to cover the pulling guard on a power play. He can stand up a 350-pound nose tackle at the point of attack to hold the gap plays, and he can wash out a 3 technique on his own play. He can reach that. So he's a very, very well-rounded center. He's a very polished guy coming from that Alabama scheme. But
Turk's got that fighting in him.
Yeah, once you pointed me onto Turk and I watched him, I really liked him, and I think if he's a guy that you can get a few rounds later, I'd be happier addressing the defensive line in the secondary first, or even wide receiver, and then come back in, say, the third or the fourth round. You get a guy like Turk who's incredibly athletic. He's got that Brandon Sheriff kind of. He doesn't take shit from anybody, and he goes after blocks, and he plays through the whistle, and he'll often play well after the whistle.
That sounds exactly like a guy Scott McLuhan would love.
Yeah,
Who doesn't love a guy like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody loves a guy
the
like
knock
that.
on him is that he's undersized, and people worry about how he will hold up against bigger defensive tackles, and how he'll hold up in pass protection against quicker defensive tackles. I'm not too worried about that. He shows a very good, certainly in the run game, he does a very good job of shielding off guys and sealing off backside defensive tackles on power plays, and he does a fantastic job reaching in zone plays. He does a great job getting up to the second level. He pulls amazingly well. The Redskins, some of their best runs last year came when they pulled Laval and Lichtensteiger. In those first few games before Laval got hurt, when they pulled those two, they've got blockers out in front, and you could do this with Turk. If you slotted him in at center and you pulled him and Sheriff on the right side, you'd have two fantastic blockers to get onto the edge with, and that would be. I see
excited.
Turk as, I'd see Turk as a very good fit. I wouldn't be too worried about the question about size. I think he can develop as a pass blocker. What he does have, because of the athleticism, is he has good feet, and he doesn't bend from the waist. He bends from the knees, which gives him a good anchor.
Yep.
So he needs to improve with his hand placement a little bit in pass protection, but I think he can be a very, very solid center.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention how he snaps the ball. It's very unique.
It is.
You guys haven't seen it before, but it works for him.
Yeah, I mean, it does work for him, and I didn't see any bad snaps. I didn't notice it until they kind of showed a close-up on a replay, and then I tweeted it out. I tweeted out a picture where I was just like, I've never seen a center snap the ball like this. From what I hear...
Describe this.
Well, he, rather than most guys would kind of hold their hand on the side of the ball and snap it back as you would expect.
Right.
But he kind of holds it where the end of the football is in the palm of his hand, and then he kind of just throws it back like that. It's hard to describe, and it's very weird.
Interesting.
Well, it's kind of like,
It's not
Clayton
something
Kershaw pitching. He's got the really odd, weird delivery as a pitcher, but it works for him, in the same way that this works for Turk.
Or Jim
Yeah.
Furyk playing golf.
Yeah, there you go. That's another one.
Yeah, there are plenty of different weird little techniques that you can pick out, and from once I tweeted that out, I had a lot of people tell me it's more common than you think, but not necessarily at the NFL level. But it works for him, and I didn't see any bad snaps from him, which would be an upgrade on what Larivas did last year with constant bad snaps.
Yeah. All right, so real quickly, linebacker, inside linebacker more specifically. How do you see them playing that position out in the draft? Will they address it early? Do you think they'll take the gamble on Jalen Smith if the opportunity presents itself? Another player I really like that you could probably get in the later rounds is Jatavis Brown, shorter guy, but he's a baller. What do you think about that spot, real quick?
Yeah, I'm kind of a little bit torn on that one. I think I've gone back and forth with thinking about Ragland in the first, because I really like him, and I think he can hold up enough in coverage that you get the upside of his run defense, and he's a great leader and all of that stuff with it.
He's
But
a terrible pass defender, though, right?
he doesn't have the athleticism that some think that everyone kind of wants from a linebacker nowadays, but he can hold up as a zone defender, which is what the Redskins do. He knows how to play the zone. From playing with Alabama, they run a lot of zone defenses, so he knows how to do it, and he knows his role, which would be to take away the crosses and wall people off, and play the hooked curl. So I think he can play that fine. Not Luke Kuechly, but still fine. So I'd toy with that. Other guys, you mentioned Brown. I haven't watched a huge amount of him. I've only watched, I think, one game, maybe caught a second, and I wasn't as impressed as everyone made out. I've seen a lot of draft Twitter in particular go, "Oh, this guy's awesome," and you see the speed, but I didn't see much else with him, and maybe I just need to go back and watch him again.
Robbie has a man crush on Jatavis Brown.
It's a fairly common thing. I've seen.
I watched his game against Pittsburgh, and I thought he was flying all over the place, and just seemed really.
I need to go back and watch that one.
Yeah, it seemed really instinctive, and the speed and explosiveness that he showed in tackling guys, to me, it stuck out.
I think it's. Sorry, Mark. No. I just think it's whether it's Brown or Ragland or somebody. I think it's almost a guarantee that Scott McGowan's going to draft an inside linebacker, and he's going to draft one that has speed because he loves speed. Because I just can't see Redskins going into next year as well as Compton and Foster developed. Those two guys are not going to be it for us.
I think that next year, going into next year, I think it will be Compton and Foster with Riley fighting for one of those spots. And I think the route they would take, they might, if they can get to, say, 12 picks, like McLuhan said, and I don't think they can, but if they can get to 11 or 12, I think they would be, if Jalen Smith falls, they'd be possibly willing to take that risk of taking that pick with him and letting him sit, have a red shirt year, and then hoping that he can come back to health and take one of the spots next year.
Now, I don't think anybody of us thought that Miles Jack was going to fall, to anywhere near where we could maybe get him. But I know in past couple weeks, he's been sort of tumbling down the draft board. Is he going to be there at 21, you think?
I still don't know.
Shaking his head no.
There was a report yesterday or today saying that there are concerns about how long he'll last, and there are teams outside the top 10 that are now doing as much research on him as possible because they didn't think he would fall, and now they think he might. But I don't think he will. He's too talented, I think, to fall from, say, the top 10 to 21. I think he'll still go in the kind of top 15 range. If he fell to 21, then
sprint
you
up
worry
to the podium.
Well, yeah, you'd think it's a no-brainer. You'd be slightly concerned that if he's fallen to 21, why 20 other teams passed on possibly the best player in the draft, if not one of the top 3 players in the draft. So you'd have to make sure you're 100% solid that this guy's going to give you at least his rookie contracts, if not more. But if you're comfortable with that, then it's a no-brainer. You take that kind of talent, but I don't see him falling to 21.
I got 2 more questions for you. Who's your favorite running back in this draft? Who you think fits the Redskins the most, I guess? And then it's pretty safe to say that we're going to draft an edge player, another pass rusher at some spot. Who is your favorite one there, and what do you think they'll do?
So running back to start with, the name escapes me at the moment, the Louisiana Tech guy.
Dixon?
Dixon, that's it. He's my favorite back that I've watched so far. He was incredibly productive. He's got good quickness. He's a guy that I can see Jay Gruden really liking and in his offense because he's a guy that could play third down and catch the ball, and he could move him out to wide receiver and put him into the slot and create different matchups. And he's a guy that can win, and he knows how to run routes, and he's a very talented receiver as well. The way he can control his body in the air to adjust for the ball and still come down to the catch was eye-opening for a guy that plays running back. So he's a guy I like.
I'd just like to say that I was the only one of us that also took Kenneth Dixon in our mock draft. So just saying, me and Mark Bullock over here, guys, just dropping some knowledge on you. Just feel free to take some.
Sean fell into a great pick.
Brutal.
Hey, you're the one that said you know nothing.
I know.
Wasn't us.
I'm sorry, Mark. Continue.
You know nothing, Sean.
Sean Snow.
Paul Perkins is another guy. Paul Perkins is another guy that I like because I watched. He was a guy that just stood out because I wasn't studying him. I was watching. I think it was Scooby Wright for Arizona. Was it Arizona State?
Yeah.
And every play I was watching, it was always a handoff to Perkins, and he'd kind of jog up to the line of scrimmage, and then suddenly he would just make 4 cuts, and before you know it, he's beaten 3 defenders and is in open field and gaining 20 yards, and you're going, geez, how did that happen? And he just stood out, and he was like, well, okay, I need to watch this guy. Forget studying Scooby Wright for now. I'm watching this guy, and I went and watched every game of him that I could. And so he has a rare cutting ability that not many people have. But with the size that he's a little bit undersized, and I'm not sure how he'll hold up as kind of an every down back. I don't think he's a guy that you want him to pound the rock 20, 25 times a game. I think he's the kind of guy that you get 10 to 15 touches maybe between runs and screens and passes and kind of stuff. He's kind of a role player that you get touches, and he'll get you solid production.
Are we in the market for an every down back, or considering the running back by committee approach of these previous years, are we not in the market for that?
Well, McLuhan seems pretty high on Matt Jones.
I don't know why. Goodness.
Well, yeah. I was pretty high on him last year, and I think the running issues were more to do with the offensive line, and Alfred Morris struggled as well. Yeah. And that's not to say Matt Jones didn't make any mistakes.
Matt Jones was one of the worst running backs in the league, I thought, last year, from a statistical production standpoint.
Woo. Don't burn our bridges, Steve.
Mark, Steve's, if you haven't noticed by now, Steve's very by-the-numbers type.
Well, and I'd just like to say to Redskins PR, if they want to bring Matt Jones on the show, I love him, and I think he's great.
Nice save. The numbers weren't fantastic, but the numbers...
You're overselling it, though. The numbers were terrible.
The numbers were what the numbers were, but it's not always just about the numbers for a developmental running back. He's a guy that McLuhan still has a lot of belief in. I think he's a guy that maybe bought into the hype of himself a little bit more, and I think he needed to have the kind of
hit a rookie wall.
Yeah, I think he kind of needed to hit that and realize, hey, this isn't all easy, and I'm not going to run for 300 yards a game like he started off the season. And the ball security is an issue. It's actually something during the offseason I'm planning to do a post on the ball security issue for Matt Jones and see exactly where I think he's at. But I think it's all fixable stuff. And what he brings is he's a guy that can run the different schemes, and he runs them with amazing physicality. And I think if they can block a little bit better for him, if they can improve from a center standpoint, and depending on how Laval comes back, maybe left guard as well. Another year of Sheriff developing, of Moses developing, and Trent Williams being Trent Williams. I think with those guys kind of together, and another year of Kirk Cousins recognizing defensive fronts and switching run plays, I think that will help him become a better running back and help him improve those numbers that you say were terrible.
Right. So, all right, last thing. Again, what do you think they're going to do about the edge or pass rusher? Are they going to do that early, or are they going to do that late? Because I think there's a guy late that you can grab, and he'd be a great developmental guy that can get after the quarterback, and Alex McAllister from Florida. I mentioned that to you earlier, but what's your quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they probably, unless a guy like Noah Spence potentially fell, he's a guy they've had in a couple of times. Unless he falls, I would say that they're more likely to wait until maybe the third and fourth to grab that edge rusher, or as you say, a guy like McAllister late. And I liked, as you said with McAllister, you kind of pointed him out, and you said how he has a good burst and how he can bend. He does a good job with that kind of thing. I think he has a lot to work on, and especially in the running game. He's not a guy that would see the field a lot early. But yeah, potentially as a developmental guy. But I think that would be the kind of thing that they would draft kind of mid to late round. But with Gillette only being on a 1-year deal, potentially they might go for, as I said, if Noah Spence were to fall, a guy that can burst off the edge that quickly. Noah Spence would be kind of a ready-made replacement for Gillette if they can't get him signed long-term.
Or if he re-hurts his Achilles.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is possible.
If he gets himself hurt again, then yeah, you could have a guy like Noah Spence that Preston Smith would play most of the downs, but you could have Spence in there kind of as an Alden Smith situation in on pass rushing downs and let him burst off the edge like he does so well.
All right. Well, Mark, thanks very much for joining us. Your insight's always great. Just one final
encyclopedic knowledge.
Yeah.
Of the
now, in 5 words or less here, 10 seconds or less. If you were Scott McLuhan, on Thursday night, who is Scott McLuhan going to pick?
I think he'll do his best to trade down. If he doesn't, I personally would go with Carl Joseph because I think he's the kind of guy that he would start day one as what McLuhan's been saying is the red player, where he could be a very good player, and he's a guy that could develop into what he calls a blue player, which is a special type player. If not, you would go defensive line if a guy like Rankins fell, or maybe one of the Alabama guys that we talked about earlier. But I think Joseph would be my guy.
All right. Well, that was our listener question, I believe. So thank you for
No. That wasn't the listener question.
Oh, it wasn't.
Real quick to answer that one, a listener picked up on the fact that last week Alex was talking about 106.7 possibly being sold and said, "What the heck was Alex talking about?" So very, very briefly, CBS Corporation owns a bunch of radio stations, including 106.7, and they are contemplating either spinning off their radio division into a separate corporation or just selling the whole bundle of them. And potential buyer would be somebody like Clear Channel. There's a couple other companies, but that was what Alex was talking about. So that's it. That was the listener question.
The more you know.
It was a weird thing to pick up on, but somebody did.
How's that for a random question?
Alex had that as a throwaway line, and somebody asked me about it. So there you go.
Yeah, we'll all have to keep our eyes peeled to see what develops with that situation. But anyways, Mark, you're the man. You're our first three-peat guest. We're so happy to have you on. We're going to keep having you on and stealing the time. Thank you again for doing the full hour, especially. Seriously, it means a lot, and you're the man.
Yeah.
Nah, it's all good. It's fun. It's always fun to chat football with you guys.
Totally.
And get some sleep, man. It's
go
late.
to sleep, Mark.
I will.
All right, well, at Mark
Awesome.
Bullock NFL on Twitter. So catch up with him there, and obviously on the Washington Post over at The Insider. So check him out there as well. And this has been the Hog Sty. We will see you next time.